All right, Don. If you could mix two
All right.
languages, which would they be and why?
Well, let's see. Love the Ruby, of course, but also Java, just to bring back the pain that I used to have in a masochistic kind of way, and also for like the big data aspect. A lot of guys are having fun with that, and just being able to move pretty fast.
The libraries. You can't ignore the libraries.
Right on. All right.
Okay, one second before you get started.
All right.
Our food is delayed a little bit again. So we're gonna do, like same thing we did last one. We're gonna talk a little bit. We're gonna take a little break, get some food because it'll be here soon, and then we can finish up with Don. And we got some extra chairs. I'm glad there's so many people here. So,
All right. Cool, man.
thank you.
Everyone, this is more people than I expected, but right on. That's great. Let's see. My name's Don Livanec. I go by the handle Libando on GitHub, Twitter, just about everything else. I work independently under my LLC, Red Iron Pro, here in Cincinnati and Dayton, so which is cool. So I get to spend time between the two cities, see what a lot of people are up to, and so forth, and do a bunch of stuff. I came from the enterprise world of Java, .NET, like back when .NET was brand new, so it's been a long time. And then moved to Rails and so forth, and having a lot of fun with that. And recently, for the last 6 months, been working on a side project and so forth. Wanted to introduce some rich functionality with JavaScript and so forth. Jumped into Ember and looked at that. Also looked at Angular. Been playing with Meteor lately and so forth, and whatnot. So, just talking about the guys, getting help from some of the guys here. And they said you should give a talk on it, kind of talk about what it's like and so forth, to go from like really old school JavaScript skills and so forth, and to immerse yourself right all the way through into the new stuff going on with Ember. So that's the idea. This talk's going to be kind of, so in that vein, this talk's going to be kind of entry level friendly, if that's okay with you. I don't know if any of you guys are like hardcore into Ember. Anybody? Just got a ton of production apps and everything out there. Nothing. So okay. So that might be good then. So with that, we'll get it going. So that's kind of my handle and so forth. All the slides and all the code that I'm going to be showing you guys is going to be on GitHub and everything like that. So like I was kind of saying. This is kind of like my journey a little bit from just server-side coding and like the basic minimum of jQuery and so forth into putting some Ember functionality in and kind of the experience that took. So I kind of put this little teaser in. Just the little secret is you're not going to remember basically anything about this presentation. And that's fine. I've been to a lot of meetups, a lot of presentations. I don't really remember a ton. The forgetful curve is pretty finite. So that being said, I'm just going to show you guys a couple tricks and where to go to and so forth. So if you're looking to get into Ember, get through the suck threshold into like competent, be able to build stuff, I can show you guys where to go and you can do it and hopefully do it that much faster. So that's kind of my goal of this talk. So why JavaScript MVC and why Ember? I'm working on a side project. I'm pretty fascinated, like my passion project right now has to deal with like learning, cognition, how we can learn more efficiently, how we can use like a software to kind of help us with that. So I've been kind of doing that. So I built a knowledge repository for software developers, kind of a side thread. I pitched it to Techstars for their veteran boot camp last year, and got accepted to go with it to just their weekend in DC where they mentored veterans and so forth. It was an awesome program. So, and that led into like Y Combinator's startup school day, and that led into like sitting down with investors. It just snowballed into this whole crazy year and so forth. So that's like a whole nother thread and whatnot. But I had this idea. We all have our ideas, right? If you build software, you have ideas. So basically they called me out on it. So I built a prototype with the help of a lot of guys here and like bootstrapped myself across the country. It was pretty awesome. But what I learned when creating a repository is quickly you have to ask the user to put in a lot of information, and that was just a buzzkill. People used the application, they stopped using the application, and so forth. Why am I going to put all my knowledge and so forth in your application if I can just go to Stack Overflow? Because lean methodology, doing the studies and so forth, all the developers I talk to, regardless of skill level, all the way from like apprentices to guys working at Apple, they don't know how to do something, they jump right into Stack Overflow, look for stuff maybe they've already pulled up. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Like maybe every single person here and whatnot. So why not just use those tools? They're super fast and whatnot. So I wanted to go to JavaScript MVC as a way to bridge that. So make rich functionality. You can do amazing things with Java MVC now. You can put Markdown right in the browser, have it render real time. Code mirror, so you can have your code right inside your browser with Vim or Emacs or whatever type of editor you want. I'm starting to see that come up more and more. So it's really brilliant. And then with some of the things that Ember gives you, you can just register real time and so forth, and you can push data, you can push it down, sync it up. It's pretty cool. So why Ember? Because I don't know if there's any anti-Ember people here. I can't find anything on the internet without there being anti-Ember people. But because there's, for me, the community, especially in Cincinnati and Dayton, is getting pretty big around Ember. That's what they're kind of coalescing around. It was originated by Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale, two guys that are huge in JMac. Two guys are huge in Rails space. Yehuda is a core contributor to Rails and so forth, and that translates really nicely into the Ember stack. So if you're not a Rails developer, it's fine. You're not going to be left out in the cold. But if you are a Rails developer, you're going to have a leg up, and you're going to understand a lot of the concepts and the magic and the convention and so forth. So I know Sparkbox is doing some Ember work. The guys in Gaslight have teamed up with Tilde, who's created Ember. So there's a lot of connections already in Dayton, Cincinnati, with the Ember community and whatnot. So it just made sense and so forth. So that's why I went with that. A couple challenges. Has anybody here tried to write any Ember, like Hello World or anything like that in Ember? Any exposure at all? Okay, what was your experience with that? Was it like super easy and joyful?
Not, I mean, the Hello World stuff, yeah. When
Right.
you start getting more complex, the learning curve's a little steep. But
Right.
once you get over it, it's pretty easy.
Right. And that tends to be the consensus. But I know a year ago it was very hard to start. It's gotten a lot better since, but there's been blowback in the community. And there's also been some really smart companies that have said, we're going to adopt Ember, and that have turned around and said, we are leaving Ember behind and going with other things. So there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of pushback, more than other technologies, because it can be hard and so forth. So, but anyway, so one of the challenges, if you're not new to JavaScript, but new to modern JavaScript, and I tend to be a contrarian, so don't be offended if I say something weird about some of your babies. Okay, it's all right. But all my JavaScript I learned a long time ago, and then I picked up jQuery and so forth, but I really haven't seen what's been going on or what you people have been doing with NPM and all this stuff, and just gone crazy. So I looked, and it's there's 60,000 packages in NPM and Brunch and Cake, and what happened? Last time I checked, this stuff was easy, and then jQuery made it easier. And then things just exploded. So now GitHub has more, JavaScript repositories than any other language. It's gone crazy. So that can be daunting if you haven't updated your skill set. I hadn't, so I had to start from the back. Where do you start? People are like, JavaScript's easy. Here's 10 books and all these videos and all this amazing amount of stuff to go through. So another thing is I don't know if you guys remember this bit. Everything's amazing, the stuff you can do with JavaScript and Ember or Angular. Let's just for the sake of argument say you can do both things with both, but everything's amazing, and just the communities out there are unbelievable. I watched a Rails cast where they went over Ember, and all the comments were like, "Thanks for showing me this. Now I'm happy I didn't go with Ember." Even though they're yeah, Ember sucks. There's all this hate and everything. It's unbelievable. And then I go you go otherwhere online and whatnot. You got all this blowback. So. And it's not just Ember, so they're pushing the envelope and everything like that. But I'm going to tell you, if you go down the Ember path, and JMac, I'm going to lean on you and some other guys that have done Ember. There is some pain. I mean, it is a new technology they put together. It's less than a year old and so forth. So especially if you play with Ember data, which I'll show you guys here in a little bit. So where where to start. Okay, so we know that there's a steep learning curve. So where do you start with an application? If you're like me, you come from Rails and you CRUD and you validate forms, validate on the client side, then on the server, talk to a database, render it all out. So how do you even design a single page application? Where do you start? What are some of the best practices? Who's done it right? Who's done it bad? What are the pros? What are the cons? Does it really make sense for us to invest in a single page application? DHH says you don't even need it. You can do other things and whatnot. So that could be a tricky one. So some of the breakthroughs for me, again, I'm going to show you guys all the resources that I used and so forth. So I'll be happy to share. So just kind of get the gist of what I'm saying. So some of the breakthroughs for me is a website called JQ Fundamentals. I know there's Code School. I know there's a bunch of stuff like that out there, but JQ Fundamentals has an in-browser code editor. It breaks down all the topics so that you can skim and blow past the stuff you already know, and then it gives you a solid foundation of the stuff that you don't already know. And then I've got a link to it as well. There's a beautiful video from on a Rails conference, and even though I keep bringing up Rails, it's not specific. Nothing's here specific to Rails. It's C#, .NET, any MVC technology is the same. But she talked about in her speak the evolution of like JavaScript programming and how it evolves as applies to a backbone application. Now, we're not talking about backbone, but that's fine. The idea is still the same as migrating from server only to backbone and some of the trends that she saw and what worked and what didn't work and so forth. So it started off using like Rails JavaScript helpers. I assume .NET has stuff like that too and whatnot. So and it talked about that being the first step, and the next step, and they realized that was limiting and so forth, is they had like the JavaScript DOM explosion and so forth. So then once they understood the pain, then they started namespacing their JavaScript. Stuff, that if you're an experienced JavaScript application developer might sound, like common, but, a lot of people have been left out on those practices. So I'll show you guys where that is as well. But also, like I said, it's famous on Hacker News a year ago. Somebody posted, Ember is easy to learn, ... No, it's not. It's awful, blah, blah, blah. And then the co-creator of Ember said, this isn't productive. This doesn't even warrant a response. And then the community blowback happened, and it was kind of bad. So in response to that, Tilda and the core developers of Ember really worked on their documentation, and they really upped their game on that. They put out some sample code and so forth to show you how to get started and whatnot. And quite frankly, I know read the documentation has been used in computer science and programming for decades. But the Ember documentation is extraordinary. It's very good. I highly recommend it. I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about here. Also, there's 2 example applications on emberjs.com that are fantastic. One is the To-Do MVC. Are you guys familiar with that project? So they implemented that in Ember, and what they did that was extraordinary is they broke down every step. So if I asked you how many steps do you think there would be to create a To-Do MVC, a reasonable response would be like, what, anybody? 5, right? I'm going to guess what you would say. I'm not very good at it. No, but there's 18 steps. So every single step is just micro. So they make it super simple for you. Put JS bins in the whole way and everything like that. So that's a brilliant example. And that shows you a single page application. It shows you some of the less complex things, but it also shows you computed properties, which is amazing. It shows you how if you update the model, it renders right through the view, so you don't have to register a listener and do all the different steps and so forth. It just happens automatically and so forth. Okay, so that's great. And then the next application that they have is brilliant because there's actually a video. So in the video, it takes you step by step. And this is an application that if you code an MVC that you're used to seeing, where it's like, here's my menu, here's page 1, page 2, and page 3. On page 2, they have a listing of all the different items, a master, and then in the center you have the detail and so forth. So that's kind of like applications we're used to seeing, right? Navigation, master, listing, and then detail. as well as forms and so forth. So they show you that application in the video and goes through behind all the theory and whatnot. So that kind of hits both things. So it's awesome jumping off points. It's very cool. We're going to show you guys that more here in just a second and do a deep dive on it and go from there. All right. So I don't know if you guys could even read that, but I was talking to a guy at a Meteor event recently, and he's a pretty smart dude, and he just does a lot of JavaScript and so forth, and I let him know that I was playing around with Ember and having a pretty good time. And, you know, like I said, a lot of anxiety, and he's in the community, he's like, you know, he's like, nobody has a good time with Ember. You know, you need to be doing Meteor stuff and so forth, or you should be doing something else. And he's like, I looked at Ember, but there's like 6 levels just to do anything. It's like ridiculous. You know, it can be so much easier. So here's some of the things that are going to come up time and time again. You don't have to memorize them. I just wanted to put it in one spot, just so if you ever had a question of what one of these things does, we can look back on it. And it's confusing, and it takes a while to wrap your head around it, because JavaScript MVC is, I don't even know why they call it that, but a JavaScript MVC, it's completely different than the MVC you guys and I know. We got the view model controller. The controller's the creamy center, the Oreo, right, that slaps the view and the model together, done. And that's just not the case. That's not the case at all. So, but with Ember, it's very simple. You create an app every single time. That does a ton of stuff for you. A router, which is the same in Angular, it's the same in Meteor and all the other JavaScript frameworks. So router just maps the URL along to with whatever model it's going to be talking to. A route glues together that model and template. We'll talk about that. A template's the view and handlebars. Okay, so I mean, again, it's all up here so you guys can refer back to it in the documentation. I'm just going to go over some high-level stuff because we're going to break here for a second and then we'll go over some code in the next part. Model's exactly what you think it is. It's something that we persist to whatever store. And then a controller. A controller is vastly different than what I'm used to in Rails and ASP.NET and Java. So a controller acts like a decorator for the model. So what that means is if you have a property that you want to hold state or use to change the template at all, and it's not being persisted to the database, then you can decorate that model with the controller fields and so forth. Makes sense? Like if you had a field that says is doing something, and then in your view is doing something, yes, then show this is doing something, blah, blah, blah. You can wire that up on your controller and then pass that along and so forth. So we're going to break here in just a second. Got a couple more slides. So got a couple more slides, then we'll break for some sandwiches and everything, and then I'm going to show you some code. I'm not going to do any live coding, but I'm going to show you some code, show you some katas, and my goal is to see how quickly I give you guys tools to see if you can get past the, that steep learning curve as quickly as possible and actually build things and do cool stuff. So this is part of the Ember magic. The first code of JavaScript in every Ember application is to create an instance of the application. It does a lot for you, and here is the output of the tool in Chrome, Ember Inspector, which I'll show you guys. And that is a tremendous amount of things for just creating an application and not doing anything. This can be very daunting and so forth. Like, how do I wrap my head around this, okay? But can you guys read that? Good enough? So basically, in a nutshell, every application gets an application controller, and that's going and everything else comes down from that, okay? And then you automatically get an index as well. So Ember gives you guys a lot of things under the hood and so forth, and then it feels constricting. Sometimes it's nicer to have nothing, and that way you could just build, and tell me what to build and so forth. But we're gonna navigate that and show you guys exactly how to do. But basically, a lot of stuff comes down. We'll talk about it. We'll get all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt wiped away and talk about how easy it is. And once you kind of put that behind, how fast you can start building stuff. But This also is another testament to just how much Ember does for you and so forth, because certain, Java MVC applications, especially right now, are expected to do certain things. So they automatically give you a lot of nice things that you're not going to spend time worrying about. Case in point, when dealing with these applications, you're going to have loading issues with JSON and so forth, right? So you automatically have a route to do loading, and they can show you like quick little magic where you can put your spinner and so forth, right? You don't have to worry about building that from scratch and the boilerplate along with that. It comes right out of the gate. There's going to be errors and so forth. So if there's errors that bubble up, it's going to take you right to that error route. If you override the error route with an error template and so forth, it'll give you a nice display out of the box. Application, everything comes from application. So if you have a static header and footer and so forth, you can put it there. And then you're going to put an outlet, which is going to be the connection to the rest of your application. Generally, the first connection is going to be the index, right? Like index.html. So it gives you all of that out of the box. There's a lot of magic. It takes some while to wrap your head around it, but after you do it and you're on the other side of that, it's really nice. It's a really good place to be. Which is exactly what you said, right? Yeah, once you're through it. So that's what a Hello World application looks like. We kind of just talked about it. So those are two templates. The first one with no name. Can anybody guess which template that is?
Yeah.
You got it. It's the application controller. There's no need to name it. So, and then it has nothing but an outlet. You could put a header, footer, whatever you want in there, but we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. No lines of code. So there's your outlet. Outlets are going to be all over the place, so we'll talk about that in a second. And then everybody gets an index. So if you don't specify anything else, it's going to shoot it right to an index. And there it is. So you could get rid of the index if you want, put Hello World instead of the outlet right there, but I kind of just wanted to show you. As far as like, well, I've got an Ember application, where do I start? It's always going to be here. So we're going to show you some skeletons where you're not even going to have to really write this code. You're just going to have to start with your skeleton and you'll be good to go. And then your application, of course, you're going to create an application. You can call this app absolutely anything you want. If you're starting Ember, if you're not doing Ember for 40 hours a week, if you're not being paid for Ember and so forth, you're just learning, just call it app. Every tutorial calls it app. You know what I mean? Keep your life simple and so forth. Just little words of experience there. Anybody recognize this graph or know who Kathy Sierra is? Like her stuff, I think, is brilliant. It's 4 years old now. I think it's just as relevant. But like I said, Ember's the first technology that I've seen where people have adopted it and literally just publicly said we're abandoning this for AngularJS, we're abandoning this for for different languages and so forth. It's still really new. It's not easy. There's a lot of assumptions, conventions baked in. It uses design patterns. It expects you to know them, such as the observer pattern, the composite pattern, the decorator pattern, and so forth. You could reopen objects, monkey patch, and so forth. So a lot of that can be daunting. Even just showing you a couple routes and so forth and what comes out of the gate can be daunting. So the trick is, and what we're going to work on after this launch, is to show you some tools where we can get through this dropout and this suck threshold and try to at least get you into the amateur portion and so forth, so that you can link pages together. And like if you have a simple multi-page, traditional CRUD app, you can at least convert that over to Ember and so forth. Expose your CRUD app as an API and see what it looks like with relatively less pain and so forth. And that way you can kind of see what's available and start tapping into these 60,000 NPM packages and the rich functionality of modern applications and whatnot. So that's going to be the goal. So along those lines, like I said, I'm building my passion project, Steel Trap, on the side, which is a knowledge repository. But this isn't really about that. But as soon as I did, and I started, talking to investors and VCs and whatnot, and like just this crazy year that I had, I realized, of course, that there's people that have already built like memory training and so forth software, so which is fine, But one of the guys is Ed Cook, who's the CEO of Memrise, which is a free app. You can check it out and so forth. They do a lot of software training on that as well. So I reached out to him. He's actually considered one of the best memory people in the world. He's won awards and everything like that. So I reached out to him about because he's doing a software startup, and I was like just learning and so forth. And basically, what he said is, I was like, have you learned this memory technique? You can memorize phone books. You can memorize, And have you used that to memorize coding? Because if you did, I mean, could you even imagine, right? If you could memorize everything there is to know about coding and just play it out. And basically, like he wrote back to me, and he was talking about explicit and memorized, or implicit knowledge versus explicit. So have you guys ever heard that? I hadn't heard that until recently. Explicit knowledge is stuff that you look up, stuff that you know, stuff that you study. According to the memory curve and forget curve and so forth, you lose about 80% of that stuff within the first 5 days, like 65% within the first 48 hours and so forth. But those are the things that you kind of know now. If you're deep in a project now, you might know a lot about it and so forth. But 2 years from now, when you look back at that code, you don't have any idea what you're doing. So implicit knowledge is stuff that you don't even have to think about. You just know how to do it. If anybody drives stick shift, you just, and then you try to explain in words how to drive stick shift. It's almost impossible. You say things like, I don't know, you just do it. Right? So that's going to be your implicit knowledge. That's stuff that you bake so deeply into your memory that you don't even have to think about it on a cognitive level and so forth. Okay? So what I thought it would be kind of fun is if we could build tools and so forth that could take us all the way from, I don't really know Ember, I don't even know where to start, to, okay, well, follow these steps in a kata fashion and see if you can build that application, right? And, the first time you do it, it might take you an hour, but the 10th time you do it, it's going to take you 12 minutes, and you're going to bake that deeply into your implicit knowledge. And even though you might not understand all the different routes and so forth, but once you do this kata a few times, then you'll start building your implicit knowledge and you'll start getting that foundation, and then you can start understanding the documentation better and so forth, and then get to the point where you're out of the suck threshold and more into the amateur and start moving forward. So sorry to keep you from lunch, we'll get to that in a second, but so I built a bunch of katas in the sense of off of one of the case studies. It's a simple case study, and I'll show you guys this and so forth. But a lot of the things so we'll talk about Tom Dale's, the one example application, the video, okay? So I'll talk about that as a case study, and there's basically 3 different links. One of the links is your blogging platform where you click on your post, you can see your different blog entries, you click on one of the entry, and then there it is right there. So you've seen that millions of times. We'll just show you an Ember version. And then we're going to show it to you with the least amount of technologies and code humanly possible. I think we boiled it down to about 45 lines of JavaScript. It's almost no JavaScript. So we're going to talk about that case study really quickly to show you all the different features. So how many steps are there to build an application like that, where all you're doing is showing a couple links, master detail? I got it down to 11 small steps. So and I can show you all this and where it exists and so forth. And then, are you guys all familiar with Git and GitHub? At least familiar with it to a certain extent? Okay, perfect. So then what I did was I created a GitHub project and I created 11 issues, and for each issue I explained what the problem was, and then inside of it gave the code for that step so that you could use it right there, and then committed it and so forth so you can see the diff of the project. Because one thing that Ember is hard to do is debug initially. So if you have everything right there and you can see what's happening, then you can, instead of spending 4 hours on that comma not being there, you can get right past that, understand what's going on, and keep moving forward and building that implicit knowledge. So we can go over the case study there, and I can show you the kata for just the blogger. Like I said, it's as simple as possible. There's no CoffeeScript, there's no branch, there's no IPM, it's just a file. That's it. There's no JSON, there's nothing. It's still Ember, it still goes over the basic concepts. And then from there, number 3, we're going to talk about a skeleton. This is the opposite end of the spectrum. So if you do a sample hello project, that's great. You're never going to be able to go to production with that, really, right? It's not minified, it's not obfuscated, there's a bunch of issues, you're refreshing the page, that's not going to work. Tapas takes care of all of that for you. That is production ready. It comes with Mina scripts for deployment and everything like that. It's very good. Also, it's written by a guy that works at Sparkbox, so when it doesn't work, I can email him and be like, what is going on with this thing? I'm gonna tweet to everybody that it's crap, and they'll be like, hold on, let me show you what you did wrong, and so forth. So that's cool. So those are both ends of the spectrum. But what's beautiful is if you do the case study number 2 and the basic one, and you understand the moving parts, then when you look at a skeleton with its hundreds of files and so forth, you can port it over, and then you can understand what it's doing. And it makes a lot of sense. And because I have all the diffs and everything that match on issues, you can actually bring up both browsers, which I'll do, and you can say, okay, on this one we had to modify this file, on this one we had to modify this file, so you can see the difference all the way through, right? So that's making it easier, right, getting it through that initial phase. So that one uses a lot of technologies. It uses your JavaScript or CoffeeScript. It uses Brunch. It uses Cake. It does auto refresh. It minifies. It gives you absolutely everything that you could want to build a production environment, production Ember application. And then I did one where one of the knocks against Ember is it's hard to do test-driven development, test first. So then I did the same thing. I said this time I'm going to do tests first. So we have an issue, so 1 through 11, so if tests are applicable, there's separate branches and so forth. We'll have like one begin, one end. One begin's going to have your failing test, one end's going to have the code with your passing test. So you can, so right there, it's like, how do I test this? How do I do that? You can look at that step and you can see how we can drive Ember applications through tests. Cool. And then not finally, but the last one with Ember is the Rails Ember. So we took a Rails application and what's it like to actually put Ember right in there. I was shocked by how hard this was initially. When you look for applications, I used Ember Rails initially for it. I know that there's another one that's getting more traction. The app kit. You don't like it at all? There you go. Right, and do you find it easy out of the gate?
I'm a Rails man. I mean, I'm new to Rails.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a little difficult, I got it.
Right. But more difficult than it should have been, right?
Yeah.
Right, well, at least I thought so. So like, I thought it would be like right out of the gate. It just wasn't the case because the project's maturing. It spins off CoffeeScript, which is supposed to talk to your other JavaScript. So anyway, so again, we can compare those steps. And then finally, I just threw a Meteor version out of there too. It's like 3 files. So if anybody ever says like Ember's crap, you should go with Meteor and so forth. If you were to look at this project, you can compare the two and see exactly what the difference is. Because a guy here who I think is an awesome developer in Cincinnati came a few months ago, and he's famous now, internet famous now for writing Meteor is going to kill Rails, and so forth. And he's actually a pioneer, like a well-known in the Ruby community, and so forth. So it's interesting to hear those arguments and how he hedged his thoughts and everything, how Josh did that. But it's also really interesting to see the code side by side and to get a concrete understanding without having to spend a month understanding Ember and so forth. So I put that out there. So with that being said, that's just the slides. The code's super easy. I'm not going to do any live coding, and you can show it to you. And if any of you guys were looking to get into Ember programming after this, we could show you the steps and everything. I think it'll make it a lot easier for you and so forth, regardless of what kind of path you want to go on. So, cool. Any questions so far?
Did you look at any other companies out there that are using Ember? The one I found was Zendesk, which was the biggest user. I didn't know if you found any other companies that have production Ember apps out there.
Sure. I do quite a bit of subcontracting and independent work. So I talk to a lot of companies in Dayton as well as Cincinnati. And most of the Rails shops now are adopting Ember pretty heavily.
Okay.
And they're pushing that down to their clients. Sometimes the clients don't even know what Ember is and so forth. But that's happening. Brandery is about to push through. Brandery in Cincinnati is about to push through another group of companies and so forth. And I'm guessing that you're going to be seeing people trying to hire Ember developers like, crazy, or at least startups trying to hire Ember developers. There's a lot of their apps are going to start probably building Ember, just like your road trippers and so forth was built with Backbone 2 or 3 years ago. So you can see that. Nationally, Tilde, of course, is the biggest. They're the company that's created Ember. They're creating Skylight with it.
Okay.
So that's a big one. And Discourse, which is the guys that did Stack Overflow, created form software with Discourse. That is Ember. That's Ember as well. And then on the Ember.js, boom. They have some examples and so forth. But so I lost it. But just looking at that, Square Reader and so forth, Square Reader, and a bunch of others. So it is picking up steam. If you look at Indeed.com's job trends and so forth, I'm going to tell you right now that they're going to say Ember's gaining traction, Angular's gaining even more traction. There's less of a barrier to entry with that one. And then if you compare it to .NET, C# or Java, I mean, all that stuff flatlines right at the bottom. So it's easy to think that everything's going MVC and JavaScript and whatnot, but the reality is it's just niche. So my favorite quote recently was, at a corporation, nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM, and at a startup, nobody ever gets fired for bringing in Ember.js. It's kind of like both. It's like the opposite ends of the spectrum. So, cool. But also, side note is, Ember got released less than a year ago, and it does have that barrier to entry and whatnot, which we'll see if we can get through to a certain extent. But once you get through that, you can build amazing things. And if you learn technology, you can build amazing things very quickly. I'm not there yet, but I know some people that are. And from what I gather and so forth, those outliers are starting to happen. So people are really, I think like the floodgates are going to open up here soon, and a lot more applications are going to be coming with it, as well as a lot more digital agencies, especially Rails heavy, are going to try to stand out using Ember front-end technology and whatnot. So, cool. You guys want to grab some lunch, and then we can just take a look at the code afterwards?
So okay, so real quick,